jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to turn it off.
He hasn't had enough heart attacks. Jeff Leib from the Denver Post, covering the transportation beat. I mean, I thought I got rid of you when your ticker went. When was that?
Oh, it was 03.
And it didn't
Couldn't
get
rid of me, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
You're gonna have to work harder.
I mean, I kept pumping you full of trans fat as much as I could. It didn't work. From the city and county of Broomfield, Pat Quinn, thank you for joining. You guys are really proud about being a city and county.
Yes, we are.
There's only 2 city and counties, Denver and you?
And in Colorado, correct.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Nobody knows why it's a big deal, but people in elected office really like it.
It's a big deal. You control your own destiny. I mean, you get to do your own planning, both city and county wise, and so we feel that there's a lot of advantages to it. So,
okay, we'll let that go. No, actually, congratulations. It's kind of fun. All right. I'm Jon Caldara. Welcome to Independence Institute's Independent Thinking. Tonight on the table, RTD. Yes, my favorite topic, and a big fat. Didn't somebody, if only somebody warned us, if only somebody 4 years ago could have said, you know, this project likely isn't going to have a big impact, it's going to be underfunded and over budget. If only somebody out there tried to warn people, then we wouldn't be in this mess as we are today. Back to the Denver Post. If only there was some loyal voice of opposition back there to say these numbers are fraudulent, that would have made some difference.
Of course, I had to go back and check what you were saying at the time. And you were a loyal opponent. You were one of the few. You said it's dumb, it's a boondoggle, it's not the way to spend all this money, it's not the way to move people. You talked about choo-choo trains, you talked about buses are a much better idea, but you didn't, I think, nail the 2 reasons why this thing is in a lot of trouble now, which is a plummeting sales tax receipts and rising costs of construction.
If you go back to the Independence Institute publications, we actually did quite a bit of that, and our analysis was, and if you remember, even on this program, we said this assumption that sales tax rates are going to grow at 6% a year for the next 30 years is ridiculous, particularly given that the first few years before Fastracks they were flat.
They were
flat.
underwater.
And no, let me make it very clear. Even on this program, we made it clear those numbers were fraudulent.
I'm not representing RTD, but I'll tell you what they said. They said they had some years prior to that with double-digit sales tax growth. So they did an averaging, and they looked at their decade or 2-decade long, and they said, let's go with roughly 6%. It clearly was a mistake. And Pat has been meeting with the Metro Mayor's Caucus on this thing, trying to dig out from this. Nobody forecasts the fall in sales tax receipts that we've seen in the last
No one said that the fall was going to be as bad as it was.
Right.
But certainly we looked at this and we said this is undoable. This is ridiculous. And when we had Cal Marcella in this very seat, we said, well, who checked these? And he said, well, valuable, important members of the community like the Denver Chamber of Commerce has gone over these numbers and they said it was okay, which is the wolf who's saying, oh yeah, the hen house is doing just fine.
Every economist they hired, I agree with you, said they look good. So one of them, I think, said, you know, 6.5 or 7 looks high. Let's drop it down.
And this is what happens in government, however, all too often. And when you talk to people behind closed doors, when the cameras aren't rolling and when you're not around, they say, oh yeah, you know, those people in Dr. Cog, they were under orders. You know, they make these numbers work. The idea was to get us pregnant on this, and you know, this isn't the first time this happened. Now, Broomfield wasn't a county back then, but
in 2004.
In 2004,
yes, we were.
Oh, it was okay, but Broomfield, you know, one of the great things about our neck of the woods, I live in Boulder, we have one of the best transit corridors in the country. That the Denver to Boulder bus route, and thanks to the HOT lane there, is among the best, but we got sold a bill of goods, and now it seems as though RTD is going to use you guys, the mayors, to stand behind and say, you know what, we need, even though we were lied to, the best thing to do here is to double down now.
Well, you know, John, I have a problem with the characterization that it's a lie. You know, first of all, I have a business background, and I'm involved in forecasting continuously. you know, I'm not here to defend RTD's 2004 numbers. What I'm here is to look at the numbers they're looking forward and their trend lines that they're looking going to the future. The Metro Mayor's Caucus.
Actually, before you go there, let's go back to 2004. Okay. You're not here to defend those numbers. But I think we need to talk about these numbers, and that I see an ethical issue, a moral issue, that if fraudulent numbers are put out and a bill of goods is sold, and you can talk to pretty much any mayor back then, and they'll say, I mean, I remember, I won't mention the names, we said, you know, this isn't going to happen this way, but we need to do this in unison. If we reward RTD for doing something that is now almost doubled in price, I mean, all we're going to get is more of this. Isn't there an ethical issue when politicians wrap themselves around a project and say, we promise we will do this, knowing full well they can't, and then they come back in a few years saying, now that we've got you on the hook, we're going to ask you for double the amount.
Well,
isn't there an issue there?
I'm going to, obviously, the ethics and, you know, and what RTD does and how they do in the future is of great issue to me, and I think it's a great issue to the Metro Mayor's Caucus. But going back and using the word fraudulent is something I wouldn't use. Once again, I'm in the business, you know, the business community. I do forecasting all the time. And
would you have forecasted those numbers?
The 5%. You look at the trend lines that they show. If you look at the 20-year average that they were showing, you know, for the previous 20 years before 2004, a 5% or 5.8% forecast wasn't out of line for what I would see within the business world.
They forecast, I believe, 6.2% growth as the average. And the other part of it, when you take a look at, they only looked at 20 years, not 30 years, and the debt is for 30 years. But when you took a look at those 20 years, the growth rates were incredibly volatile. So some years you'd have 12%, sometimes you'd have negative 3%. And what happens is if you have that negative 3% early on, it has a snowball effect. So what was so, I'm going to use, and you can object to the term, what was so fraudulent about that was that they knew, even at the beginning, if we didn't get that 6%, it was going to cause these problems. They also knew full well that the cost of these projects balloon. You know, it's one thing to say they didn't know. I have a hard time believing that.
Well, once again, I'm just not going to buy in the comment that it was fraudulent. I think there was an honest effort to forecast the numbers, both construction-wise. You know, once again, I'm in a similar vein. You know, you take the construction costs, for example. We'll take that down. I'm involved with a mining company that's involved in mines at Carlsbad and New Mexico and Utah. And nobody could have predicted the 10 or 11% inflation that we saw in 2006 and 2007. I mean, you might have predicted it, but I don't think anybody else would have, and I don't think that was a reasonable prediction. To say the fact that the 3% inflation they used for the construction cost was fraudulent, I think is a stretch at best. And you know, and that's just my honest opinion. So what my view is, and the reason why
all we can say is go back to the documents we wrote back then. I think even the boneheads at the Independence Institute could tell that these numbers weren't going to work, and I think a lot of good people knew they weren't going to work either.
Well, what I'm concentrating on, what I think the Metro Mayor's Caucus is focusing on, is what do we do now? I mean, how do we move forward? And I think the consensus has been reached that the mayors do want to complete Fastracks as designed in 2004 prior to 2017, and that's the task force I'm on, that Jeff seems to be on because he's there every meeting. You know, that's what we're looking at. And I ran, you know, my first public office was in 2007, and I'm a CPA by training. You know, I'm a chief financial officer at companies, and I ran for office because I want to look at numbers going forward. And so my goal is to make sure, number one, that the numbers going forward are reasonable, that I can sell within my community, and number two, that oversight's put in place going the future. So I'm going to look towards the future because I want to see, personally, want to see Fastracks completed. I want to see it completed by 2017, and I think that's the consensus of the Metro Mayor's Caucus. So the question is, what do we do now? And that's what I have been focusing on, and focusing on the transparency of RTD, on the transparency of their board, you know, on the transparency of their numbers, and that's what our Metro Mayor's Caucus is doing. Jeff's been in every one of those meetings, and there is transparency right now in the process. There is scrutiny in the process, and as Jeff said prior to going there, you know, I'm one of the people that's looking at it very critically because I'm one of those corridors that isn't being funded right now, and it's of concern to our communities, including Boulder.